My name is Hannah Parker. I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was supposed to be getting married. Not in some vague, distant future way. Not in the soft, dreamy language people use when they still have time to pretend everything will work itself out. I mean, the invitations were already mailed, the deposits were already paid, the seating chart had become its own special kind of nightmare, and I had spent the last 2 months answering texts about flowers, food, and whether navy and dusty blue were too close together in photographs. I thought I knew exactly what my life was about to look like. I thought I knew the man I was going to marry. I was wrong. I'm a veteran. I did 2 tours overseas. I came back with most of my body intact, which is more than some of the men I served with can say. I don't talk about that lightly, and I don't use it for drama. It's just the truth. War has a way of stripping language down until only the facts survive. And the fact is, I would not be alive if not for 5 men. Those 5 men were supposed to stand beside me at my wedding. Not because I needed symmetry in photos, not because I wanted some cinematic military moment for the ceremony. They were there because they are my family. Chosen in the worst place possible, forged under pressure most people are lucky enough never to understand. Eli lost his left arm below the elbow. Marcus has burn scars across nearly half his face and neck, the kind that makes strangers glance too long and then pretend they weren't staring. Dean walks with a hard, uneven limp from shrapnel damage that never fully healed right. And the other 2, Nate and Chris, carry their injuries in quieter ways. You wouldn't see all of them in a wedding photo. But I know where they live. In the pauses. In the way somebody scans exits without thinking. In the way laughter sometimes arrives a second late, like it had to make it through smoke first. These men saved my life, literally. There are breaths in my body that belong to them. So when my fiancé, well, ex-fiancé now, texted me while I was at work, I genuinely thought at first that I was misreading it. The message came in just after lunch, casual, soft, almost affectionate in the way cruelty sometimes disguises itself before it lands. Hey, babe. So I talked to my mom, and we decided it's probably best if your army friends don't come to the wedding. Some of our guests already said they'd be uncomfortable around them, and we don't want the photos to look weird. You understand, right? Love you. I stared at my phone so long the screen dimmed. Then I read it again, and again, 6 times, maybe more. There is a specific kind of silence that happens when your mind understands the words before your heart can catch up. It feels like falling through thin ice and not even having time to scream before the cold gets in. I remember looking down at my hands, expecting them to shake. They didn't. That almost scared me more. Because if I had been hysterical, if I had cried right there at my desk, maybe I could have told myself this was just shock, something temporary, something emotional. But I was calm in a way that felt ancient, like some buried instinct inside me had woken up, looked at the truth and said, there it is. There's the line. Don't cross back over it. I texted him 2 words. Understood. That was it. No question mark, no argument, no, what do you mean? No room for him to soften it or rewrite it or pretend he'd been misunderstood. Then I stood up, told my supervisor I needed to leave for a personal emergency, and walked out before I changed my mind. The drive to the venue is mostly a blur now, but I remember one strange detail with painful clarity. A song came on the radio that I had once considered for our first dance. I turned it off so hard I nearly cracked the screen. The venue coordinator was a woman named Melissa, with a neat blonde bob, and the kind of steady voice people probably pay extra for during weddings. When I told her the wedding needed to be canceled due to irreconcilable differences discovered late in planning, something in my expression must have told her not to ask for details. She just went quiet for a beat and said, I'm very sorry. We were going to lose the deposit, $4,200, gone in one conversation. 3 weeks earlier, that number would have made me nauseous. That afternoon, I barely felt it. Money has weight until dignity enters the room. Then suddenly it doesn't weigh much at all. Melissa told me she could notify the caterer and florist on their end, since we had booked through the venue. I thanked her, signed what needed signing, and walked back to my car with the strangest sensation blooming inside my chest. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to oxygen. I sat behind the wheel for a full minute before making the next call. Eli picked up on the second ring. Hannah? His voice changed instantly, sharp with concern. Men who have been through hell together learn to hear trouble before it's spoken aloud. I swallowed once. The wedding's off. Silence. Not empty silence. The kind packed tight with understanding. Then, very quietly, he said, What happened? I looked out through the windshield at the parking lot, at a row of flower beds somebody had tried very hard to make cheerful. He texted me that he and his mother decided you guys shouldn't come. Another silence, this one harder. He said some guests would be uncomfortable, I continued. And even then, my voice stayed almost unnaturally calm. And that the photos would look weird. For a second, I heard nothing at all. Then Eli exhaled, slow and heavy, like he was trying not to say something that would get him arrested. What do you need? He asked. It was such a simple question. No pity, no dramatic outrage, no attempt to tell me how to feel. Just that. What do you need? And maybe that was the moment the grief finally found a shape. I need to do something on Saturday, I said. Not a wedding, just something good. For the guys. For everyone who can make it. He didn't hesitate. I'll handle it. I closed my eyes for a second. Thank you. Hannah? Yeah? You did the right thing. That should have made me cry. It didn't. Not yet. By the time I got home that evening, Ryan was in the kitchen making dinner like nothing had happened. That, somehow, was the most insulting part. He was standing at the stove, stirring something in a skillet, music playing low from the speaker on the counter. The apartment smelled like garlic and butter. Domestic, familiar, almost tender. He turned when he heard me come in and smiled. Hey, babe, he said. How was your day? I looked at him and felt something inside me shift so decisively it was almost audible. The man I loved would never have sent that text. Maybe that should have devastated me more than it did, but I think, in that moment, devastation had already burned through and left something colder behind. Fine, I said, setting my keys on the counter. We need to talk. He smiled like this was nothing. About what? The wedding's off. He laughed. Actually laughed. Not because he thought I was joking in a nervous way. Not because he misheard me. He laughed because he thought I was being dramatic, and he expected this to blow over in 5 minutes. What? He said, turning back toward me with a little grin. Because of a text? Come on, Hannah. I said nothing. He rolled his eyes and leaned against the counter. My mom's friends are important people. We're trying to make a good impression. Your friends will understand. They're military. They get sacrifice. There are sentences that end relationships before the speaker finishes saying them. That was one of them. I stared at him for a long second. That isn't sacrifice. He frowned, impatient already. Sacrifice, I said, each word precise, is what those men gave for this country. What you asked for was discrimination against disabled veterans, because they might make your mother's friends uncomfortable. He made a face like I was being exhausting. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm hearing it exactly the way you meant it. He sighed, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck, performing frustration now. You always do this. You take one thing and turn it into some huge moral statement. I almost laughed then, but there was nothing funny in me. One thing? It's one day, Hannah. I stepped closer. Say that again. He didn't notice the danger in my quiet. Men like Ryan rarely do. They mistake softness for surrender right up until the door closes behind them. It's one day, he repeated. They can come to the reception or something. Just not the ceremony. The pictures are forever. For one strange moment, everything became very clear. Not blurry clear, not emotional clear. Battlefield clear. The kind where instinct and truth line up in the same direction. I saw, all at once, every small thing I had ignored because I loved him. The way he always had an excuse to skip unit reunions. The faint discomfort on his face when Marcus laughed too loudly in public and people looked. The time he told me one of my military friends had a heavy vibe, as if trauma were a personality flaw. Tiny moments, dust-sized things, easy to dismiss one by one, until suddenly they weren't dust anymore. They were a trail. And it led here. I asked him very calmly, "Do you hear yourself?" He threw up his hands. "Do you?" "Yes," I said, "perfectly." His expression shifted then, just slightly, irritation giving way to caution. He was beginning to realize the ground under him was not stable anymore. "Hannah, you're overreacting." I canceled the venue. That landed. He blinked. "You did what?" "I canceled the venue. I'll contact the remaining vendors in the morning, and I'd appreciate it if you moved your things out by the weekend." His face changed in stages. Confusion, disbelief, anger. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Over a text?" "Over what the text revealed." His voice sharpened. "So that's it? 4 years and you just throw everything away?" I held his gaze. "You threw it away when you decided the men who saved my life would ruin your wedding photos." Something flickered in his face at that. Shame, maybe. But if it was there, it was brief. It drowned almost immediately in self-preservation. "You're being insane right now." "No," I said, "I'm being finished." The lease on the apartment was in my name. It had been mine before I met him, before the engagement, before all the soft little future plans we stacked up like glass ornaments and called stability. That mattered now. He must have realized it at the exact same moment, because the confidence went out of him like air out of a punctured tire. The next 3 hours were exhausting in exactly the way you'd expect. First came tears, then accusations, then apologies that weren't really apologies. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry this got blown out of proportion. I'm sorry my mom worded it badly. Not once did he say the actual thing that mattered. Not once did he say she was wrong. Not once did he say he was ashamed. Instead, he paced the living room while I stood near the window, arms folded tight across my chest, listening to the man I had nearly married fight harder for appearances than for decency. At one point he said, "Do you know how humiliating this is going to be for me?" I looked at him and thought, with a strange, detached calm, "You still don't get it. You may never get it." Then he called his mother. Of course he did. She arrived 20 minutes later in a cloud of perfume and outrage, pushing through the apartment door like she was entering a courtroom she already owned. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask whether I was all right. She started screaming almost immediately about how I was ruining her son's life, embarrassing their family, and throwing away years of commitment over some crippled strangers. The room went very still. There it was, not polished, not softened for text message etiquette, just the raw truth standing in my living room in expensive shoes. I pulled out my phone and started recording. She either didn't notice or didn't care. Ryan told me to stop being dramatic. His mother kept going, calling me unstable, accusing me of cruelty, acting as though I was the one who had done something unspeakable. Maybe the ugliest part was how ordinary they both seemed while saying it, as if this kind of ugliness had lived comfortably inside them for years. I let her talk. Every word was a gift she didn't realize she was giving me. By the time she finally ran out of volume, the apartment felt poisoned. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just told Ryan he had until Saturday to get his things out. That night, I slept on a friend's couch because I couldn't bear the thought of closing my eyes in that apartment with his voice still in the walls. And sometime around 3 a.m, staring up at a water stain on someone else's ceiling, I realized the most painful part wasn't that my wedding was over. It was that the man I loved had looked at the people who kept me alive and seen an aesthetic problem. That kind of revelation doesn't break your heart all at once. It hollows it out. By Saturday afternoon, the wedding would have been impossible to save, even if I'd wanted to. I didn't. That was the strange thing people kept misunderstanding afterward. They imagined some dramatic window where I might have calmed down, heard Ryan out, accepted a prettier version of what he meant, and stitched the future back together with enough denial. There wasn't one. Once you hear someone reduce your loyalty, your history, your grief, and the people who carried you through the worst parts of your life into a photo problem, something fundamental shifts. Not loudly, not always with anger. Sometimes it happens in silence, like a lock turning. By Friday night, most of Ryan's things were gone. He'd moved out in waves, first with sharp, bitter efficiency, then with long pauses that felt almost theatrical, like he was waiting for me to stop him. I never did. I stayed polite. Cold, maybe, but polite. I answered only practical questions. I told him where the extra boxes were. I pointed him toward the hallway closet when he said he couldn't find his winter coat. I did not ask if he was okay. I did not ask where he was going. At one point, he stood in the bedroom doorway holding an armful of shirts and looked at me like he expected some softness to return. "You're really not going to reconsider?" "No." "You're going to throw away 4 years over this?" I folded another sweater into a drawer I no longer had to share. "No, Ryan. I'm ending 4 years because of what this revealed." He stared at me for a second, jaw tight, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "You always think everything has to mean something bigger." I looked up at him then, "And you keep proving that it does." He left after that without another word. Sunday would eventually be the day I changed the locks, but Saturday came first. Saturday became something else entirely. Eli and the others had turned what should have been a wound into a gathering so full of warmth it almost hurt in a different way. He booked a private room at the barbecue place we all loved, the kind with scarred wooden tables, paper towel rolls instead of cloth napkins, and the smell of smoked meat that hits you before the host even says hello. The kind of place where nobody cared what you looked like. The kind of place where people laughed with their whole bodies. I got there 10 minutes early and still somehow managed to be one of the last people in the room. Men from my unit had driven in from hours away, some I hadn't seen in months, a few I hadn't seen in over a year. All of them showed up like there had never been any question. There were the 5 who were supposed to stand beside me, and then there were another dozen or so friends and former brothers in arms scattered around the room, talking too loudly, hugging too hard, grinning at me with the kind of affection that immediately makes crying dangerous. The second I stepped through the doorway, Marcus threw his arms out wide and said, "There she is, the only woman I know who canceled a wedding and somehow upgraded to brisket." The room burst into laughter. I laughed too, even though my throat had tightened so fast it almost hurt. Eli came over first and pulled me into a hug that was brief and solid and careful, in the way people are when they know you might break if they hold on too long. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I looked around the room, at Dean leaning against the wall with that familiar crooked stance, at Chris already arguing with someone over sauces, at Nate pretending to inspect the dessert tray like it required tactical analysis, at Marcus grinning like he'd personally declared this day a victory. And for the first time since that text came in, I felt something that resembled steadiness. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." The food came fast and in excess, exactly as it should have. Platters of brisket, ribs, pulled pork, cornbread, baked beans, mac and cheese, heavy enough to count as a life choice. Somebody made a joke about how this was the healthiest emotional support group in America if you ignored literally everything on the table. We ate like people who had known hunger in different forms. We toasted with beer, sweet tea, and cheap bourbon someone had smuggled in with complete lack of subtlety. And then, because my friends refused to let anything remain solemn for too long, the speeches started. Eli went first, short, simple. He said he was sorry the wedding ended this way, but not sorry I found out before it was too late. He said some losses are just badly disguised rescue missions. Then he lifted his glass to me and added, "To Hannah, who may have terrifying taste in men, but excellent taste in friends." That got a roar of approval. I threw a napkin at him. Then Dean stood up and told a story from deployment that I had completely forgotten. A stupid, ridiculous story about me getting so angry over terrible instant coffee that I tried to barter 3 packets of contraband hot sauce for something drinkable and nearly started a black market economy in our barracks. By the time he got to the punchline, I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. Not grief tears, not this time. Real laughter. Sharp and surprised, and almost disorienting after days of holding myself so tightly together. Then Marcus stood. Marcus, whose scars made strangers uncomfortable only if they were the kind of strangers who had never learned how to look at another human being without ranking them by visual ease. He raised his glass and said, "Honestly, the wedding would have been nice, sure, but I'm trying real hard to stay focused on the important thing here, which is that I now have a medically unnecessary but spiritually essential amount of brisket in front of me." Everyone laughed. He waited, then added in a softer voice, "For real though, Hannah, anybody who can't see what matters doesn't deserve a front row seat to your life." That one landed deep. You could feel it. I looked down for a second because suddenly the room blurred at the edges. I wasn't crying exactly. It was more like my body was finally allowing certain truths in all the way. What I had lost was real, but what I had kept was sacred. Later, someone started taking pictures. Not staged ones. Not the kind arranged for symmetry and social approval. Just real ones. Arms over shoulders, sauce-stained smiles, Marcus pretending to use his prosthetic like a back scratcher because he knew it made people laugh every single time. Dean mid-sentence. Eli half smiling in that quiet way he does when he's happier than he'll admit out loud. I was in the middle of them, laughing. Actually laughing. That mattered. Because I knew, even then, that Ryan and his mother would never understand what those photos really captured. They would only see the surface and miss the point entirely. The point was not that my wedding had been replaced. The point was that love had shown up anyway. When I posted the pictures later that night, I kept the caption simple. "Surrounded by the best men I know. Wouldn't trade this for anything." I posted 8 photos total. No explanation. No mention of the canceled wedding. No accusation. I didn't need to say more. The truth was already in the images. And apparently, that was enough to set everything on fire. Because by Sunday afternoon, mutual friends were texting. Some were subtle. "Hey, is everything okay?" Others were less so. "Wait, wasn't this supposed to be your wedding weekend?" One person, who clearly had no sense of tact and possibly no functioning inner voice, just wrote, "Did you leave Ryan?" I ignored most of them. Not because I was ashamed. I wasn't. But because I still didn't have the energy to turn my private collapse into a public Q&A session. Let people wonder. Let them piece together what they could. Anyone who actually mattered already knew enough. Then Ryan's mother decided that wondering wasn't good enough. She went on the neighborhood social media group. the one usually reserved for lost pets, suspicious vans, and arguments about garbage bins, and posted that I had abandoned her son right before the wedding due to untreated PTSD and increasingly unstable behavior. She said I had violent tendencies, that I was dangerous, that neighbors should be aware. I found out because one of the women in my building, who had always been friendly in a distant, elevator small talk kind of way, saw me checking my mail and suddenly looked terrified. Not awkward, not uncertain, terrified. She actually stepped back. That was the moment something cold and deliberate settled over me. I went upstairs, sat at my kitchen counter, and read screenshots of the posts that 3 different people had already sent me. Unstable, dangerous, violent tendencies. I stared at those words for a long time. I have never been violent with anyone outside of war. I have never laid a hand on Ryan. I barely even raised my voice in that final conversation, and even then it was only because disbelief has volume. But I know how words like that work, especially when attached to women who served. People love a narrative they already think they understand. A traumatized veteran, a failed engagement. Suddenly, strangers start filling in blanks with whatever version makes them feel safest. So I did something I'd already half decided I might need to do. I posted the recording. Not the whole evening, just the part that mattered. The part where Ryan's mother, standing in my apartment like she owned morality itself, called the men who saved my life crippled strangers. I posted it with one caption. For context, here's the actual reason the wedding was canceled. That was all. No rant. No dramatic speech. Just truth. The response was immediate. It spread faster than I expected and slower than panic, meaning there was enough time for me to regret it for about 11 seconds before I realized regret had already missed its window. Friends shared it. Then friends of friends. Then somebody posted it to a local veterans group. Then another one. By the second day, people I didn't know were messaging me to say things like, "Thank you for standing by them," and "My brother is a disabled Marine and this made me cry," and "She said the quiet part out loud." There were also uglier messages, of course. The internet never disappoints in that department, but the balance had shifted. Ryan's mother's version of me as unstable and dangerous had collided with her own recorded voice, and truth tends to hit harder when it's audible. Her original neighborhood post disappeared sometime that evening. Deleted. Too late, obviously. Screenshots live forever. Ryan started texting within an hour. First angry. "You had no right to post that." Then more frantic. "Take it down. My mom is getting harassed." Then defensive. "She didn't mean it like that, and you know it." Then threatening. "My cousin is a lawyer, and we're looking into defamation." I read every message. I answered none of them. There is a kind of power in silence when the other person is expecting access to you they no longer deserve. Tuesday night, around 11, he showed up at my apartment. I knew it was him before I looked through the peephole. There's a certain rhythm to someone pounding on your door when they believe emotion entitles them to your attention. "Hannah," he shouted, "open the door." I didn't. He hit the wood again, harder this time. "We need to talk." I stood in the dark hallway barefoot, phone already in my hand, every nerve in my body sharpened into one hard line. "No," I said through the door, "we don't. You're ruining my life." I almost laughed at the wording. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. Not, "My mother lied about you." Not, "I'm sorry this happened." Not, "I understand why you're hurt." Just that, "You're ruining my life." His voice cracked on the next sentence, half fury, half panic. "Do you know what people are saying about us? About her? About me?" I leaned against the wall and answered as evenly as I could. "You should leave." "Hannah!" "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." That set him off. He started shouting then, saying no one would date him now, saying his mother had to take down all her social media, saying people were messaging his job, saying I had turned a private disagreement into public humiliation. And somewhere in the middle of it, the thing that should have stayed inside his head slipped out into the hallway. All of this over a stupid compromise. Compromise. There it was again. That word people use when they want dignity to negotiate with cruelty. I closed my eyes for a second and said, "That's not what compromise means." He swore at the door. I called the non-emergency line. By the time an officer arrived, Ryan was gone. But I filed a report anyway. I told him he had come to my apartment late at night, banged on the door, refused to leave immediately, and had already been harassing me by message. The officer was calm, professional, and blessedly uninterested in dramatics. He took notes, gave me a case number, told me to keep documenting everything. Paper trails save women in ways apologies never do. The next morning, Eli texted, "Proud of you. Keep records of all of it." Then Marcus, 2 minutes later, "Also, if he comes back, I volunteer to stand outside your building looking terrifying in a tank top. I laughed out loud in my kitchen, coffee halfway to my mouth. I texted back, "You always look terrifying in a tank top." He replied, "Thank you, that means a lot." The weirdest part, though, was not Ryan. It was the people around him. His friends started quietly reaching out to my friends, trying to find some hidden explanation that would make the story easier to live with. Because apparently, to certain kinds of people, it was more believable that I had cheated, spiraled, or lost my mind than that I had ended a wedding over one text exposing a moral failure. One of Ryan's friends apparently asked Eli, "That can't be the whole reason, right?" And Eli, bless him, said, "It's exactly the whole reason." Another woman, I think one of the bridesmaids I barely knew, told Dean that maybe Ryan's family had a point because wedding photos were important. Dean hung up on her, as he should have. The whole thing exposed more than just Ryan. It exposed how many people will instinctively defend cruelty if it's dressed in etiquette and framed as practicality. But by then, something inside me had stopped asking to be understood by those people. Let them talk. Let them squirm. Let them try to invent a more comfortable story. I already had the truth, and for once, truth was louder than gossip. Still, that night, alone in my apartment, the locks changed now, Ryan gone, silence settling in strange new corners. I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth and caught my own reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, because I looked clearer. More tired, yes. Sadder in certain angles, but clearer. Like someone who had finally stopped negotiating against her own instincts. The wedding was dead. The relationship was over. And yet the deepest feeling underneath all the noise was not grief. It was relief so quiet it almost sounded like guilt. That unsettled me, because part of me thought I should be more shattered than I was. 4 years is a long time. A future is not nothing. But another part of me, the part I trust more now, kept whispering the same thing. You found out in time. And maybe that was enough to survive the rest. By Wednesday, the legal threat arrived. Not in a formal letter, not in anything that looked official enough to matter, just another message, this time longer, colder, trying to sound like it carried weight. My cousin is a lawyer. We're reviewing your post for defamation. You've caused serious damage. I read it once, then set my phone down on the counter and finished making coffee before I responded in the only way I had been responding to him all week. I didn't. Instead, I sent the message to Eli. He replied in under a minute. That's not defamation. It's literally her voice. Then, a few minutes later, sending it to Josh. He actually practices law. Josh called me that afternoon. "Hannah," he said, voice calm in the way professionals get when they've already decided something isn't complicated. "You're fine." "Yeah? Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," he explained. "You didn't edit it to mislead. You didn't add false claims. You posted exactly what she said." I leaned back against my kitchen counter. It was recorded in my apartment. "Even better," he said. "One-party consent state. You're allowed to record a conversation you're part of. Completely legal." I exhaled slowly. "So they're bluffing?" "Not even a good bluff," he said. "They're hoping you scare easily." I looked around my apartment, at the quiet space that had started to feel like mine again. "I don't," I said. "I figured." We hung up after that, and for the first time since Ryan had thrown around the word lawyer, the threat shrank down to its real size. Small. Desperate. Empty. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the point where things shifted from personal to wider. Because sometime between Thursday morning and Friday afternoon, someone, still don't know who, sent the recording to the worst possible place Ryan could have imagined. Or maybe the most appropriate one. He worked at a mid-size marketing firm downtown. Not huge, but established enough to have steady clients, decent offices, a reputation that mattered. He'd been there about 3 years, working as an account manager. Around $65,000 a year. Not bad. Stable. The kind of job people build their identity around without realizing how fragile it actually is. One of his firm's biggest clients was a national veterans organization. They handled fundraising campaigns, awareness events, support programs for wounded veterans, the kind of work that looks good in brochures and matters even more behind the scenes. Ryan managed that account. He helped coordinate their annual gala, their donation drives, their public messaging. He was, in many ways, one of the faces connecting that organization to the outside world, which meant that when someone sent them a recording of his mother, his family, calling disabled veterans, people who make others uncomfortable, it didn't land softly. I found out 2 days later. Not from Ryan, not from the internet, from my mother. She called me mid-afternoon, her voice tight in a way I rarely hear. "Hannah," she said, "who is this woman screaming at me? I straightened immediately. What? She says you've been harassing her daughter online, my mom continued, confused and increasingly irritated. That you got her fired, that you're running some kind of smear campaign. I have no idea who she is. I closed my eyes briefly. Ryan's mother. Of course. I'm sorry, I said quietly. She's my ex's mother. There was a pause. A lot has happened, I added. Do you have a minute? I have all the minutes, my mom said. Start talking. So I did, from the beginning. The text, the cancellation, the party, the post, the recording. I didn't rush it. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid it out piece by piece, the way you would explain something you've already accepted, but still need someone else to understand. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Then my mother asked one question. She wanted your friends excluded because of their injuries? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, in a voice that had gone very still, she said, Those boys who came to Christmas, the ones you told me saved your life? Yes, Mom. Silence again. And then, I never liked him anyway. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She complained about my brisket, my mom added, almost as an afterthought. Like that alone had sealed his fate long before any of this. Despite everything, I laughed. Of course she did. My mother's tone shifted back, sharper now. That woman called me and screamed at me like I was responsible for her daughter's job. Wait, I said, sitting up straighter. What? You didn't know? She asked. No. There was a rustle on her end, like she was adjusting the phone against her shoulder. Well, apparently your little recording made its way to some organization her daughter works with, she said. And now they've dropped her company as a client. She kept saying something about contracts and money and how you ruined everything. I went very still. The Veterans Organization. Of course. It clicked into place all at once. Mom, I said slowly, I didn't send it to them. I didn't think you did, she replied, but someone did. I stared at the wall in front of me. I genuinely didn't know who. It could have been anyone. One of the thousands of people who had seen the post. Someone from the veterans groups. Someone local who recognized the implications immediately. All it would have taken was one person thinking, they should know. What happened to her? I asked quietly. She said they lost the account, my mom said. A big one. And now her company has reassigned her. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. Reassigned meant demoted. Moved away from clients. Less pay. Less visibility. Less future. Her mother was screaming that you destroyed her career, my mom added. I closed my eyes. There it was. The weight of it. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent. Something complicated. I didn't tell anyone to send it, I said. I know, my mom replied. But Hannah, even if you had, would that be wrong? I didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer wasn't simple. That organization existed to support wounded veterans, the exact kind of men Ryan and his mother had dismissed as uncomfortable. Didn't they have a right to know the kind of people representing them? Didn't that matter? I don't know, I said finally. My mom made a soft sound. I think you do. We talked a little longer, about smaller things, about how she was handling it, about how I was sleeping, which was a generous term for what I had been doing at night. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking, not about revenge, not about whether he deserved it, but about consequences. Because that's what this was. No one fabricated anything. No one twisted words. The truth had simply traveled further than Ryan and his mother expected. And now it had landed somewhere it actually mattered. That didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like gravity. Ryan tried to contact me again that evening. New email address. Different tone. Less anger this time. More urgency. Hannah, please, this has gone too far. My job is on the line. My mom is a mess. You need to take that post down. I stared at the message, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Because what he still didn't understand, what he might never understand, was that this had stopped being about him the moment he decided those men didn't belong in his version of a perfect day. He had made a choice. And now the world was reacting to it. That wasn't my responsibility. Over the next few days, his attempts got creative. Another email from a different account. Blocked. A message sent through a mutual friend. Ignored. He even showed up at the barbecue place again, apparently thinking I might be there, like it had become some kind of ritual. I wasn't, but the owner recognized him from the photos and asked him to leave. That detail made me smile in a way I didn't expect. Not because I wanted him humiliated, but because it reminded me that not everyone was confused about what mattered. He also tried something else, something smaller, more desperate. He contacted my employer's HR department, filed a complaint. I only found out because HR called me in for a brief, awkward meeting where they explained that someone had raised concerns about my online behavior. I told them exactly what I had posted, showed them the recording, explained the context. They listened, nodded, and then said, "We don't see any policy violations here." Case closed. Truth, again, holding its shape. His mother, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. No more posts. No more messages. Nothing. Apparently, according to one of the emails Ryan had managed to sneak past my filters, her husband, his stepfather, had stepped in. There was some kind of ultimatum. Something about staying out of public situations. Something about consequences inside their own family. I didn't know the details. I didn't need to. All I knew was that the loudest voice in the room had finally been forced quiet. And in that silence, something inside me settled. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. The group chat we had, Eli named it Wedding Crashers, because of course he did, kept buzzing every few days. Memes, check-ins, terrible jokes. Marcus sent a message one morning that just said, "You gave up a wedding for us. That's the most romantically stupid thing anyone's ever done. I love you." I stared at it for a second, then typed back, "I didn't give up anything worth having." He replied instantly, "Damn right." I put my phone down after that and looked out the window. The world outside hadn't changed. Cars still passed. People still walked their dogs. Life moved forward in that quiet, relentless way it always does. But something in me had shifted permanently. Not just because of what I lost, but because of what I refused to accept. And for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel like I was reacting anymore. I felt like I was choosing. Time didn't fix everything. It just rearranged it. The sharpest edges dulled first. The constant notifications slowed. The messages stopped coming in waves and started arriving in occasional ripples instead. Updates from mutual friends, fragments of information I never asked for, but somehow always found their way to me. Life, as it tends to do, moved on. Just not in the way I had planned. A few weeks after everything settled, I heard that Ryan had moved back in with his mother. That part didn't surprise me. What did was the reason. With the pay cut from his firm, no more client-facing work, no more account bonuses, his apartment had quietly slipped out of reach. The version of his life he had been so careful to present had started to collapse in small practical ways. Rent, bills, status, all the things that had once seemed stable, gone, or at least reduced. The irony of it didn't feel satisfying the way people might expect. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory. It just felt like consequence. And consequences, I was learning, rarely arrive with clean emotional labels. I also heard, through the same quiet, secondhand channels, that his mother had never apologized. Not publicly, not privately, not even in the vague, half-formed way people sometimes attempt when they realize they've gone too far. She had simply gone silent, withdrawn, contained, as if removing her voice from the conversation was the same thing as accountability. It wasn't, but I had stopped needing it to be. Then, about a month after the last time Ryan showed up at my door, one final message made it through. New email address. New subject line. Same person. I almost deleted it without opening it. Almost. But something, curiosity maybe, or the part of me that still wanted closure even though I knew it wouldn't come from him, made me tap it open. It was long. Longer than anything he'd sent before. Rambling in places. Carefully worded in others. It started with an apology, or something that looked like one at first glance. "I'm sorry the text came across harshly." I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Came across harshly. Not I was wrong. Not I hurt you. Not I disrespected the people who matter most to you. Just that, as if the problem had been phrasing. As if cruelty could be softened into acceptability if you just adjusted the tone. The rest of the message followed the same pattern. He said he was sorry things had spiraled. He said he wished I had talked to him more before making such a drastic decision. He said the wedding could have been worked out if I had been willing to compromise. There was that word again. Compromise. Still sitting in his vocabulary like it belonged there. He never once said that what he had asked for was wrong. Not directly. Not clearly. Instead, he circled around it. He said he understood now that maybe it wasn't the best idea. That maybe his mother had pushed things too far. That maybe he should have handled it differently. Maybes. All of it maybes. And then, near the end, the part that told me everything I needed to know. "I just don't understand how you could choose strangers over the person who loved you." I read that line twice. Then a third time, and something inside me didn't break. It settled, because there it was, still, unchanged, even after everything, even after the fallout, even after the consequences that had rippled out into his life in ways neither of us had expected. He still saw them as strangers. I closed the email, didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain, because the truth, the real truth, was something he had never understood from the beginning. Those men were never strangers. They were the ones who held pressure on my wound when I got hit. The ones who carried me when I couldn't walk. The ones who sat with me through nights where sleep felt like something I had to earn instead of something I deserved. The ones who didn't ask me to be easy, or quiet, or visually convenient. They took me exactly as I was, at my worst, and never once suggested I needed to be adjusted to fit someone else's comfort. Ryan had looked at them and seen an inconvenience, an aesthetic problem, something to manage, something to minimize, something to move out of frame. And that, more than the text, more than the argument, more than the way his mother spoke about them in my living room, that was the moment the relationship had truly ended. Not when I canceled the venue, not when he moved out, but when I realized he would never see the people I loved as fully human in the way that mattered. That kind of difference doesn't get solved. It doesn't get negotiated. It doesn't get fixed in couples therapy over polite conversations and structured communication exercises. It just is. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. A few weeks later, the group chat lit up again. Eli had found a cabin. Nothing fancy, just a place out by a lake, far enough from everything to feel like a break, but close enough that no one had to take time off work they couldn't afford. Plans started forming immediately. Who was bringing what? Who was driving? How much food was too much food? Spoiler, there is no such thing. Marcus announced he was bringing his girlfriend, the one he met through a burn survivor support group the year before. She's cooler than all of you, he added, which we all immediately took as a challenge. Chris said he was bringing his dog. Then followed it up with, objectively the best dog on the planet, which he had said about every dog he'd ever owned. I watched the messages scroll in, smiling in that quiet way you do when you realize something important hasn't been taken from you. I would be the only single one there. That part didn't bother me. Not the way it might have before, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what came next in terms of replacing what I had lost. I wasn't looking for someone new. I wasn't trying to rewrite the future immediately. I was still. And that stillness felt earned. There was a part of me, honest, a little uncomfortable, that kept circling back to one question. How did I not see it? 4 years is not a short time. 4 years is enough time to learn someone's habits, their rhythms, their values. Or at least it should be. So how did I miss something this fundamental? The answer didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in memories that felt different when I looked at them now. The time Ryan said he didn't want to go to Dean's birthday because it would be kind of depressing. The way he always found a reason to skip our unit reunions. The comments, subtle, easy to dismiss, about how my PTSD made him feel like he was walking on eggshells, even though I had been in therapy for years and had worked hard to build something stable out of something that had once been chaos. At the time, I explained those things away. Told myself he just didn't understand. Told myself he would learn. Told myself love meant giving people room to grow. And maybe sometimes it does. But sometimes it means recognizing when someone has already shown you who they are and believing them. That's the part I missed. Not the signs. The willingness to see them clearly. Now I could. Now I did. And strangely, that didn't make me feel ashamed. It made me feel aware, sharper, less likely to negotiate against my own instincts the next time something felt off. Because there would be a next time. Not soon, but eventually. And when it came, I would know what mattered. I stood in my kitchen one evening, months after everything, sunlight coming through the window at that angle that makes ordinary spaces look almost cinematic. For a second, I thought about what my wedding day had been supposed to look like. The dress, the music, the carefully arranged seating chart, the photographs that would have captured a version of my life that no longer existed. And then, without meaning to, my mind shifted to that Saturday instead. The barbecue place, the noise, the laughter, Marcus holding up his plate like it was a trophy, Eli's quiet, steady presence. The photos we took, imperfect, unposed, real. No one worrying about how they looked. No one asking who belonged in the frame. We were just there, together, exactly as we were. And I realized something then that I hadn't fully put into words before. That day, what it became instead of what it was supposed to be was better than the wedding ever would have been. Not because it replaced it, but because it revealed the truth underneath it. Who mattered? Who showed up? Who saw me clearly? I lost money. I lost a relationship I thought would last forever. I lost a version of my future that had once felt certain. But I kept my brothers. I kept my sense of what is right. And I kept the part of myself that refused to shrink love into something convenient. Someone asked me recently, one of those well-meaning, gently intrusive questions, if I regretted how I handled it. If I wished I had slowed down, talked it out, tried therapy, anything other than ending it so quickly. I didn't even have to think about it. No, some things are deal breakers. Some things tell you everything you need to know in a single moment. That text was mine. And if I had to choose again, I would still cancel the wedding. I would still choose them. Every time.